Hi, this is Melissa Howard, and today we are doing a basics yoga class. It's about 15 minutes long, and it is for anyone, any level. It should be done in the morning and in the evening. There is meditation, stretching and strength, and also there's final relaxation. So we're going to start in seated meditation. In your seated meditation, you're going to want to sit in the position that is most comfortable for you. In the beginning, you'll want to start with 2 minutes. Today, we're only going to do 2 minutes, but I would like for you to progressively go longer. You can either sit as I'm sitting on my knees, or you can sit as Shauna is sitting in Sukhasana or easy pose. She's going to sit on a block because it's more comfortable for her. So you have the option, here you go, Shauna, of sitting on a block, or you can sit on a blanket or pillow if that's what you have available at home. It's really what you have available. She's sitting in a very comfortable seated position with her legs crossed, one leg in front of the other. She's going to take her palms to her knees, and her palms are going to face up. Notice that her shoulders are relaxed away from her ears. Her spine is nice and long, and she's going to close her eyes and start to focus on her breathing. So in this pose, the only thing that you are allowed to do is breathe. You don't want to think. You don't want to allow your mind to wander, but you really want to sit and focus on your breathing. So Shauna is going to start what is called Ujjayi breathing by taking a nice deep inhale through the nose and exhale through the nose. Now, if you listen closely, you can possibly hear her breathing. After your 2 minutes of meditation, she's going to open her eyes, remove the block, and she's going to come into what we call child's pose. So she's going to come to her knees, her hips are going to come to her heels, she's reaching her arms out in front of her, fingers are spread as she actively reaches towards the edge of the mat. Notice how she's pressing her hips down towards her heels. She's getting full extension in her spine, her shoulders are away from her ears, and she's reaching with her fingers towards the edge of the mat. Good, so keep reaching. Good, and notice how her head is relaxed down into the mat. This stretch here stretches the hips. It also stretches the back. So if you are having some issues with your back, your lower back, maybe your back and your hips are tight, you're sitting all day, then this is going to be a good stretch for you. Good, so she's going to slowly rise up to what we call cat-cow pose. So her hips are going to be in line with her knees and her shoulders are in line with her wrist. She's going to take a deep breath, inhale. She's going to raise her head and look up toward the ceiling, lower her belly down towards the mat, and exhale. She's going to drop her head down, and notice how her shoulder blades spread across her back as she rounds through her spine. So inhale, look up. She's going to take 5 breaths in this pose. The recommended for most of the poses that we are doing is 5 breaths, still breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. And after her 5 breaths, she's going to come back into child's pose. So with all the poses that we are doing, you can easily take the pose and go longer. So if you want to do 10 breaths instead of just 5 breaths, then it's going to obviously make your flexibility better if you hold the pose longer. So she's going back into child's pose. Good, and then from here she's going to come into a plank pose. So first she's going to come into plank on her knees. So she's going to bring her knees together and her hands are out in front of her. Notice how she's lowering her hips towards the mat, so her hips are tucked under. Her spine is nice and long. So this is the modified version, so it's easier to start here in this plank. Otherwise, she's going to straighten her legs, good, and push through her heels. So this is a more difficult version of plank. From this plank pose, she's going to shift her hips up and back to downward facing dog. So notice how she lifts her hips back and up toward the ceiling, then towards the back wall, and the heels are going towards the mat. She's feeling a nice deep stretch in her calf muscles here, and she's spreading her fingertips as she's pressing her palms down into the mat. So notice how her palms and her hands are pressing down into the mat and her fingers are spread wide. From here, Sean, if you could step your right foot to your hands. If your your foot falls short, you just pick it up and put it up near your hands. Bring your left knee to the mat, and she's going to come into a lunge pose. Reach your arms to the ceiling. Good, and she's going to take 5 breaths here. So notice how her shoulders are relaxed away from her ears. She's shifting her hips forward and down towards the mat. Her knee is in line with her ankle so that she's not passing the toes. And she's breathing here in this pose. She's feeling a nice long stretch in the hip flexor on the left side. After 5 breaths, Shauna, bring your hand back to the mat. Step your right foot back to your downward facing dog. Good. Now her left foot is going to step forward into her low lunge. If the foot falls short, pick it up and put it there. Good. Notice that she's on her right knee. Reach your arms to the ceiling. Good. Her shoulders are away from her ears. She's shifting her hips forward and down. So she's feeling the stretch here in her right hip flexor, maybe even a little bit in the quad. So if you're sitting all day, which means that your hips are always active, you want to stretch your hips so that they're not always super tight. They're going to be tight if you're constantly sitting. So go ahead and bring your hands back to the mat. Good, and step back to your downward facing dog. Good, so downward dog is a pose that we use a lot in yoga because it stretches so much of the body. Shauna's gonna walk her hands to the back of the mat. Good, and come into what we call a forward fold. Good, reach your hands down and around, pull it to your legs. Good, so she's gonna pull herself down by grabbing the back of her legs. Notice how her hips are going up to the ceiling as her head drops down and her neck is relaxed and her head is coming down towards the toes. So she's getting full extension here by the spine. You can see how the spine is nice and straight. She's not rounded in her back, and she's feeling a nice stretch here in her hamstrings. So one more deep breath here, Shauna. Good. Now she's going to reach her arms out to the ceiling. Now reach your arms out wide as if you're trying to push the walls to the outside away. So we call this a swan dive. Come all the way up and reach the arms over the head. Press the palms together. Good. And maybe reach behind you. So she's getting a nice back bend and she's stretching her chest here. And then go ahead and bring your hands down by your side. Good. From here, she's going to bend her right knee and grab her foot. So this is a quadricep stretch. We did the hamstrings, we did the hip flexors. Now we're going to stretch the quads. If you're having a hard time here, you can always use a strap, and you can take the strap and you can wrap that around the foot. If you cannot reach your foot, you can take the strap to wrap it around the foot and pull your heel in. Now, Shauna doesn't actually need the strap, so we're just showing you. Shauna's going to grab her foot. Good. And if you're having a really hard time with the balance, then go ahead and use the wall. So, Shauna's going to use the wall today. Good. So from here, notice how her hand is turning palm facing up because she's going into a bit of a deeper stretch here. So she's stretching her shoulder here, her pec muscle, and she's also stretching her quadriceps. So she's stretching the front of her thigh. She's grabbing the inside of the foot or the ankle, and then she's going to start to kick her foot back into her hand. Good, so stay there. We're not going to go all the way down, but just to give you an idea of how to get more length here. Eventually this turns into a dancer pose, but since this is for beginners and this is going to be quick, then we're not going to do the full pose. Good, Shauna, go to the other side. So she grabs the foot on the other side. Once again, still getting the stretch in the hip flexor and the quadricep muscle. It's very important to stretch those quads because we stretch the hamstrings a lot. So you want to make sure that you're also getting the front of the thigh as well. Notice how she's got her shoulder rolling back and she's really getting a stretch in the pec muscle as well. Good, so go ahead and start to lean forward. Good, stay right there. Eventually she'll reach her arm in front of her and she'll go into the full extension of the pose, which is dancer pose. But right now, we just want to get the quad and the hip flexor stretch. Good, so go ahead and start to lower your leg down. We're gonna come into another balance pose. Balance is important. Without balance, you'll be wobbling all over the place. So next we're gonna do tree pose. With tree pose, you'll wanna start simple with your foot to the inside of your ankle. So this is the easiest version of the tree pose. Now the idea here is for this knee to turn out to the side and open the hip. So you're opening the hip and you're also going to start to work into a balance. So then she's going to bring her heel to the inside of her calf muscle. So right there on the shin bone. Good. Now she's working on her balance. She's starting to get a little wobbly. Good. So from here, if you're able to, you're going to start to bring your heel maybe up a little bit higher and place it on the inside of the thigh. If you want.
Not quite yet.
Not quite yet. Good. So you're going to hold this pose here for 5 breaths also. And while you're doing this pose, I want you to really open up the hips. So you want to make sure that your spine is nice and long. You really suck in your belly. And if you do want to bring that foot all the way up, you want to get your foot as high as you possibly can and make sure that you're not pressing into your knee. Good. Go ahead and start to come down and go to the other side. So remember, the easiest version is to have your foot at your ankle. And if you want to make it a little bit harder, you can go ahead and place it on the lower leg. And the most advanced version would be to bring the leg all the way up to the inside of the thigh, which is not necessary. The goal here is to open the hip and start working on that balance. Good, so she has one more breath in this pose. Good, and then start to lower your leg. Good, and come down. So Shauna, go ahead and inhale, reach your arms up to the ceiling. Good, give me another back bend here. So really work on that spine by reaching back. Back bending is really important. We don't do it nearly as often as we should. And go ahead and fold. Exhale, reach your hands towards the floor. Good, and now walk your hands back to that downward facing dog. Remember I was saying how important it is to do that down dog? We really like this pose in yoga for some reason. It's a relaxation pose, we like it. From here, she's going to bend her right knee. So she's going to lift the right leg, take the right knee and pull it in between her hands. She's going into a pigeon pose. The knee down, knee down. Good, so she's going into a pigeon pose. This pose here is an external hip opener. So she's sliding her knee as much as she can forward in between the hands, and she's going to bring her knee close to her right wrist. Her back leg is fully extended and her hips are neutral. Okay, so she's not leaning down into her right hip, but her hips are neutral. She's going to start to lift up and lengthen through her spine. So notice how she has to come to her fingertips, but she's really squeezing her inner thighs together. Now she's going to start to walk her hands forward out in front of her so that she can go deeper into the pose. And she's really getting a nice stretch in her external rotator in her hip right now. And she's breathing. Aren't you, Shauna? Yes. Good. So go ahead and start to walk your hands back in. She's going to place her hands down and extend her right leg back behind her. Good, and now she's gonna go to the other side. So the left leg lifts. She's gonna slide her left knee up to her hands. The knee is gonna come behind the left wrist. And she's extending through her right leg. Now she's on the top of the foot and on the right leg in the back. And her hips are completely neutral. She's gonna come to the fingertips so she can fully extend through her spine. Her shoulders are away from her ears. Now she's gonna walk her hands out in front of her so she can get the full extension of the pose. And notice how neutral that her hips are. She's not falling into her hips. Her spine is nice and long, and she's reaching her arms in front of her. Good, and then slowly start to walk your hands back in. Good, place your hands flat and extend your left leg behind you. Good. So notice in her down dog that her shoulder blades are spread away from each other across her back, and her shoulders are away from her ears. She's really firmly pressing down, and her hips are going up and back to the back wall. Shauna, if you could come to your knees for me, please. So Shauna is actually going to bring her hips in between her heels. As Shauna brings her hips in between her heels, she's going to start to lower her hips down towards the floor. Now, if this is painful for your knees, you can take a block or a stack of blankets, maybe pillows, and you can place it right up under your hips. So Shauna's going to take the block and she's going to place it under her hips. So maybe long ways or whatever works for you, but you want to make sure that your knees are feeling good. Maybe you can even roll up a towel and place it underneath your knees. So Shauna is now internally rotating her hips. So we were doing the external rotation with the pigeon pose, and now she's internally rotating the hips. And she should feel a nice stretch here in the quads, and also she's maybe feeling some stretch in the hip flexors. So you want to hold this pose for 5 breaths. And if you are feeling the pose and you notice that you're sitting all the way down on the floor and you're completely in between the heels, then you can start to walk your hands behind you until you're laying all the way down on the floor. So Shauna, start to take your hands behind you just to reach back and open the chest. Good. Notice how she lifts her chest. Good. And then slowly coming back up, bringing the hands back to the thighs. Good. And slowly rise up on your knees. And I'm going to remove the block. Make sure that your heels are about 6 inches apart. We're going into a back bend. She's going to take her hands to her lower back. Good. Lift her chest and drop her head back. Good. So notice how she's pushing her hips forward. Her shoulders are rolling back as she drops her head back. And she's breathing. Good. And slowly come back after 5 breaths. Good. And coming into a child's pose. So after you do a back bend, you want to make sure that you counter it with the child's pose, because you're getting so much, you're building so much tension in your back that you want to make sure that you release it by going the other way. Good. So you're going to rise up just a little bit, Shauna, and I want you to interlace your fingers behind your back. Good. Start to bring those knees together, interlace your fingers behind you, and now she's going to reach her interlaced fingers over her head. So this is a good shoulder stretch. So she's opening her shoulders. Good. Drop your head down, reach the arms over. Good. So notice how she's reaching forward. She's pressing her palms together and she's really straightening her arms. If you notice that your arms are starting to round forward, then you want to open the chest by doing the shoulder stretch. It's really good to open the chest to reach the arms over the head. Good. Slowly start to come back. Good. And release. So now Shauna's going to lay down completely flat on the mat. We're going to go into a Cobra Pose. Good. So notice how she has her fingers spread. Her elbows are in. Her shoulders are away from her ears. She's going to take in a deep breath. Good. And she's going to lift her chest and her shoulders off of the mat. She's squeezing her legs together in the back, and she's pressing the tops of the feet down into the mat. And she's breathing for 5 breaths here. Good. She's going to push herself up a little bit more, start to look up toward the ceiling, and she's feeling a nice squeeze right here in her lower back. Go ahead and start to lower yourself down. Good. And she's going to take a break here. Good. Shauna, go ahead and take your arms by your side and push back into child's pose. Good. So once again, she's stretching and lengthening her spine, and she's breathing normally. Good. From here, Shauna, could you bring your legs around out in front of you? She's going to sit down on her bottom as she lays down on her back. Then she's going to pull her knees into her chest, and she's going to hug her knees in and really squeeze the legs in. Good. From here, she's going to take her arms out to the side. Then she's going to twist her knees down to the right side. Good, so she's getting a really good stretch here in the side of the body and the lower back. This is something that you can do every day. If you've had a long day at work, maybe you've been sitting down all day, maybe you've been standing up all day. This is really good to release the lower back. It's a good twist, and it's good to get the organs back in place because they've been still all day, and you want to make sure that you're really wringing those organs out and getting a nice full stretch in the lower back and in the intestines. Go ahead and bring the knees up and go over to the other side. So there's 5 breaths in each of these poses. Maybe you really like this pose, you're welcome to hold it longer. So this is just a guideline for you. You can hold it as long as you like, but here she's holding it for 5 breaths. Notice how she has full extension. Both shoulders are down on the mat. You want to make sure if she needs to bring the knees back up, because maybe the shoulder's lifting, she'll bring the knees back up to get the shoulder completely down. Good, and pull your knees back into your chest. So now we're gonna get started for final relaxation. Shauna, go ahead and sit up for me, please. We have a blanket here that we've rolled up. You simply roll up the blanket or a towel or anything that you may possibly have. If you have a bolster, that's great too. So we just rolled it up so it's really nice and tight. I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna place it right at her lower back. So it's at the base of her spine and at the top of her hips. And she's gonna lay all the way down. It's literally underneath of her spine. So she's laying her whole entire spine on this blanket. Her arms are out to the side and she's relaxing here. Her feet are relaxed out to the side. Her arms are relaxed out to the side. She's getting a nice stretch here in her pec muscles. If you are noticing that you're having really tight shoulders, maybe your arms are rounding forward a little bit, then you wanna make sure that you have this to really open up the shoulders and the chest. So she's gonna lay here for a little bit. You are welcome to hold this pose for as long as you like. Thank you for joining us for our basic yoga class today. This is final relaxation. You can take it whenever you like, maybe to end a hard day at work, maybe you just need to relax. You can always come here. If you would like to follow me or take more of my classes, maybe see where I'm located, you can find me at melissahoward.com. Thank you for practicing yoga with me today. Namaste.